Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. In our first week of lectures, we looked at the global environmental status and we looked at the biodiversity, and then we also looked at the land and soil. In all of these, we did come across the concept of ecosystem services. So we are going to now look into what are the legal legislations which at the international level, national level, which are available for the purpose, and in which context do we really work. So you might recollect, how did we see about these things, ecosystems, how did we identify the different kind of ecosystems, from provisioning services to regulating services, supporting services, and cultural services. So we had seen all this, you may recollect, and today we are going to look at the legislation part of it, the policy and guidelines in this area. So we highlighted the global decline in the extent, like what is happening, conditions and functionality of ecosystems, and their capacity to provide services, like how they really, what kind of services they provide, and then we also looked at what kind of change is happening in that, and what are these consequences, what serious consequences we are going to face because of the decline in the ecosystem services. So we also looked at various drivers of change through the report which we were studying. So in this particular lecture, we will develop further understanding on law, policy, institutional arrangement for ecosystem services. So accordingly, our coverage will include that we'll look at the context for the ecosystem services, and then we'll look at the international agreements and policy objectives. We'll also look at the national ecosystem services policy at the Indian context. Then we'll also look at the examples of initiatives related on ecosystem services in India. Thereafter, we'll look at the international examples of how things have been taken care of, and then we'll also look at what requirements are laid by the international finance institutions for ecosystem purpose, and lastly we'll look at guidance on how to integrate all these ecosystem services, the requirement, the understanding into the EIA process. The learning outcomes which is expected from you after completion of this session includes that you should be able to contextualize the ecosystem services in the policy framework. Further, you should be able to identify and relate international agreements and policy objectives, and then also see how it really translates international level legislation or the regional level legislation. You should be able to identify various national ecosystem services policy from the Indian context. Further, you should be able to quote or discuss some of the examples of the initiatives related to ecosystem services, and then you should also be able to relate some of the international examples. Further, you should be able to identify international finance institutions and what kind of tools they use for making people abide by or to undertake ecosystem services assessment. Further, you should be able to identify what kind of guidances are available to integrate ecosystem services into EIA system. So now looking at the background on ecosystem services, we see that there's an increase in considerations and concerns for ecosystem services, and it's becoming very common now. So generally in most of the government policies or the development work are encouraged to be within the environmental limits. So generally there might not be very distinct policy for this, but then it is usually encouraged for all kind of development work to take care of the environmental limits, the carrying capacity of the environment. So that has been encouraged in all kind of government policies. And we see that different government takes different initiatives for the purpose. So everyone's approach, every nation's approach is very different in this regard. So for example, we can see that in USA, the White House released a memorandum in 2015 which directed the federal agencies, the central government, who consider the value of ecosystem services into their central planning and decision making. So they announced, they declared, released a memorandum in this regard, and this memorandum instructed the agencies, the planning agencies and decision making agencies, to develop and institutionalize policies. So they would develop policy, they would create institutions and bodies for this, so that the ecosystem services are considered in the development project and the decision making process. And this would be taken care through a lot of appropriate planning investment or like regulatory context. So whichever the tools which we studied about. So through all those things, it is required, it is advised to be taken care of. So further, this particular memorandum also established a process for federal government to develop a more detailed guidance. So in order to facilitate that, in order to help people incorporate these in their work, it helped them, gave them a process and also help them through guidance and other support document and tools which would be required in terms of like policy, programs and projects to maintain the ecosystem. So that was done. So here you can see the snip of the memorandum, and you can see the purpose and what all the instructions have been given, and the link is also provided to you. So we also see that there is also increasing use of the concept of gross ecosystem products, GEP, so which is aligned with the gross domestic product in the economic terms. So now how you really look at it from the environmental ecosystem term. So gross and ecosystem product specifically means, or it really captures the total economic value of all the ecosystem products. So any place, what kind of ecosystem products they have, so it gives a economic value to that product as well as the services one gets. And this gross ecosystem product is total value of final ecosystem goods and services supplied to human well-being, for our well-being in region annually. So that is how it captures. It looks at the total figure and it looks at the annual figure, and can be measured in terms of biophysical value and monetary value. So in here, biophysical values are also given, or it is given as in terms of money. So what kind of products or what kind of services are really included? So you can see that ecosystem measured, and it may include like the forests, what kind of grasslands are there, wetland, the quantification, the quality of that, desert, fresh water and ocean, and artificial system that are based on natural process like farmland, pasture, aquaculture, farms and urban greenland. So you see that you have a new concept here, and then how what kind of things are measured and in an annual term. So such kind of initiatives are also helping, also aligning to the larger goal of protecting the ecosystem services and the products. So China in particular has adopted this gross ecosystem product, GEP, and in collaboration or with the support of IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. So in the image, you can see how a study has calculated ecosystem product in 9 cities within the Pearl River Delta in China. You can see here. So you would also find ongoing initiatives under various IUCN themes in India as well. So, which is aligned with the ecosystem services. So you see that Mangroves for Future (MFF) project, which is initiated to address like the risk we have in the coastal and marine ecosystem, and the risk is there for the communities in this coastal and marine ecosystem area across Asia. So this particular project focuses on that, and India is part of that. And in India, we particularly focus on building socio-ecological resilience of local coastal communities. So the key output which we are looking at from in India or through this project is that we are looking at strengthening of livelihood, like how people who are dependent on these ecosystem services, their livelihood and income security can be assured or improved upon. Then we're looking at science-based policy recommendations, so like how these can improve, and then what kind of policy interventions need to be taken care of, and then creating knowledge and awareness of these products, and then also looking at capacity building of stakeholders for enhanced governance. So if the community is aware, all the stakeholders are aware, so it will help in improving the governance. So we also find another initiative, MIKE, which is monitoring the illegal killing of elephants initiative. So this is an international collaboration under conservation on international trade in endangered species of wild fauna and flora sites, which you may recollect that we have come across this many times. So through this, support is extended in the elephant range countries. So which are the elephant range countries? Through this, IUCN extends support to these countries, and they track trends related to illegal killing of elephants across Africa and Asia. So under the theme water, we see another kind of interventions which are going on, that's like regional capacity building, where they are training people on water governance parts. So this project mainly focuses on water governance and training them for that purpose, and looks at developing training modules for professional bureaucrats and diplomats. So how they would be trained, so how that capacity can be developed here. We see another intervention, which is forest landscape restoration, FLR. It's another initiative where they are focusing on the process of regaining ecological functionality, like what kind of processes can restore the functionality of all these ecosystem services, and it would eventually help in enhancing the human well-being, our well-being, and it also looks at deforested areas, degraded forest landscape. And it is more than just planting trees. It is like looking at restoration of the entire landscape and making it futuristic as well, to meet the need of the future, as well as restoring their current status, restoring or improving their current status. So that is what the project looks into. And then we also see another, that is you have project under theme climate change. And this you see that in order to cope with the uncertainties of the climate change, we have discussed about that, like there are a lot of uncertainties of climate change. So this initiative is to help people cope up with these uncertainties, communities cope up with these uncertainties. And this particular project focuses on Indian Himalayan region, where they look at the impacts of climate change on livelihood needs of people living in Himalayan states. Particularly they look at Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh and Sikkim. So likewise, we also see this would be of a more of a concern for EIA. We see that IUCN and India together also works on business and biodiversity, where you see interventions like IUCN and Tata Steel. They have entered a partnership and have adopted a policy to include no net loss of biodiversity, no net loss of biodiversity. So here they have site specific biodiversity management plans, and Tata Steel adopts this during the mining operations in India to minimize impact of biodiversity, what it could have if it is developed. So they look into that. That screening is done here, and it is also under implementation. Similar lines, you would see that they have collaborated with Tata Power and then also with Aditya Birla Group, ABG, you find that. Then they also have, on the similar theme, they have Leaders for Nature, where they look at how to engage leading private sector companies in various sectors to bring about this kind of transition, where they look at the biodiversity concerns in their entire operation. Further, we see that they also have sustainable agri-scape for future, where they are building partnership with ITC, and then looking at how this program can improve the ecosystem services, as well as that it improves the returns from those intervention. So we see that there are many ways which governments are trying. However, we see that this very limited approach of how this ecosystem services have been incorporated with the EIA system, which is yet in the process of being done. So now looking at some of the international agreements within which we are doing. So they're not very unique or distinctive policy which you see, but they have been worked around it to be implemented. So looking at the international agreements and the policy objectives, we see that there are a range of international environment agreements. By now you have seen so many international agreements which have been addressing the environmental concern. So you may also reflect the management of global environmental resources is a difficult task. So that's not really easy. So how these policy tools really help to cope up with this. So the diverse multimodal things help you to cope with such kind of environmental concerns. So another level of difficulty which we see is that at the international level, it is like it binds the nations to agree to certain cause, but it is at the local and the national or regional level where these things are really translated. So that context you need to really keep in mind. And looking at the international environmental agreements, you can see these are the key ones. We have also seen this before. So you have Convention of Biological Diversity, Convention of Biological Diversity, then you also see Conservation on International Trade in Endangered Species of Fauna and Flora. Then you also see Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, Convention on Wetlands, and then you also see World Heritage Convention, and then International Plant Protection Convention. So you see all these which are there. So we do abide by these. So looking at like Indian context, coming to National Ecosystem Services Policy, we see that in our place, we have seen this in our initial legislation part. The present environmental legislation framework of India, it's a umbrella policy act which we have is Environmental Protection Act of 1986. Within that umbrella act, all these comes. And then we also find law related to management of forest and wildlife, which is like in Forest Conservation Act of 1980 we see. We also see Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So in India, this is the umbrella act which we see, but we do not have a specific law or a policy on ecosystem services, but we do have some related policy and law on ecosystem service. So, which can be aligned is the Indian Forest Act 1927, where it helps to define what kind of concessions would be given to villagers. And then there's also village forests which are constituted. Then you also have protected forest and transit of forest produce. So all these provisions are made within Indian Forest Act. Then you also see the Forest Right Act of 2006. Then you also see the guidelines and orders issued by Ministry of Environment and Forest in terms of joint forest management and best practices for extraction of medicinal plants, and they all are important for the sustainability aspects and also to embrace the sustainability, economic sustainability development at the local level. We find Wildlife Protection Acts of 1972, so it looks into the management of national park and wildlife sanctuary, protection to like identified species and community, and also the conservation of different reserves. Then you also find Biological Diversity Act 2002, which provides guidance on sustainable use of biodiversity, then gives access and benefit sharing of biodiversity for commercial use, identification of species for conservation, and then also takes care of the documentation part. Then you also see Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. You also find Scheduled Tribe and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act, also referred as Forest Rights Act 2006. So this one defines community forest resources, what is accessible to the community, critical wildlife habitat, and it also provides ownership of minor forest produce to the local communities, so they have access to these resources, these ecosystem services, and provides like the period for the security of forest dwelling communities. So it protects them and it maintains that relationship which is required. And then the functioning of the provision is also linked with performance of ecosystems in terms of delivering the ecosystem services for livelihood. So this takes care of that. Then you also find certain state level legislation which are very, very particular to different states. For example, you would find United Khasi Jaintia Hill Autonomous District Management and Control of Forest Act 1958. And then you also find Garo Hills Autonomous District Management and Control of Forest Act 1961. All of these recognize these traditional forest land use system such as Law Lingdo, Law Kimthang and Law Niam. So they recognize that kind of services, the cultural services, the resource services they receive, and they protect it. And then you may also find wetland rules, and then also there have been a lot of studies which have been taken place to understand this biodiversity and ecosystem services. So we also see certain aligned act with this, that's the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, and then we also see Water Chess Act, Air Act, and Public Liability Insurance Act. So all these acts also become the foundation of the domestic environmental regulations, what we see here. So in the context of conservation of ecosystem of water resources and atmosphere, so they provide for setting up of pollution control board. So we see the role of pollution control board at the central and the state level. So they are empowered to prevent, control and reduce the air and water pollution, and to advise government on matters related to such kind of pollution. So you see that the Central Pollution Control Board coordinates the activities of the state boards as well. So you see that these acts also specify the industrial units have to provide on demand all information regarding the effluent treatment methods. So what kind of what industries, what kind of interventions they are taking, so that they are liable to provide. And then through this they can also use legal framework where they can collect taxes, charges or fees for the ecosystem services. So in India currently we see that there are a range of price and market based instruments. If you recollect, we have studied about the price and market based instruments, such as they apply tax, charge for the services, or set fees for the ecosystem goods and services. So, if you will recollect that India is a signatory for Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD), and this is one of the key agreements which was adopted during the Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. So we are signatories to that, and a lot of our activities align with that. So we are signatory, then how do we really translate it into our national and regional policies and the projects? So being a party to the convention, it is mandatory for us to prepare national biodiversity strategy and action plan for implementing the convention at the national level. So we have developed a national policy and micro level action strategy on biodiversity in 1999, and then we also adopted that eventually in national environmental policy. So we adopted that eventually in national environmental policy in 2006, and then we also see national biodiversity action plan was developed through the comprehensive interministerial process. So through this, how did we were signatories, then we prepared the national policy and micro level action strategy on biodiversity, then we adopted it in NEP, and then eventually prepared national biodiversity action plan. So one of the three objectives of this Convention on Biological Diversity, we see that one key element is access and benefit sharing, ABS. So this ABS refers to the process, ways, methods in which the genetic resources may be accessed by other nationalities as well, and then the host community, how they can get the benefits of sharing it with the outsiders outside the country. So it takes care of that. So this convention prescribes that access to genetic resources is subject to national legislation. So what rules we have, and accordingly India, after extensive consultation process, had enacted Biological Diversity Act in 2002 for giving effect to the provision of CBD, including those related to it. So India had prepared a National Biodiversity Action Plan in 2008. So it added to that. Further, in alignment with that, it also prepared National Biodiversity Targets (NBTs) in 2014, and where they prepared 12 national biodiversity targets, and they were aligned with the 20 global IIT biodiversity targets. We also find Nagoya Protocol on ABS, and it was adopted under the same convention, and it was adopted in 2010. And then the main purpose of this was the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from utilization of these resources, and including appropriate access to resources and appropriate transfer of relevant technologies here. And then you see that India signed this protocol in 2011 and ratified it in 2012, and it came into force in 2014, and it is being implemented at national level through this Biodiversity Act. The Nagoya Protocol would also contribute to the other objectives as well, relating to conservation and sustainability. The idea was that the biodiversity rich countries would get benefit by sharing those services, and it would be also translated to the local community, and they would be encouraged to conserve and make sustainable use of these biodiversity resources. Now, looking at the examples of initiatives related to ecosystem services in India, like what kind of initiatives we are taking. So, we see that natural capital accounting and valuation of ecosystem services project, which is ANCAVES project, you can see. So, this now in this project you see that it is funded by European Union, and it is implemented by United Nations Statistics Division, where India is one of the 5 countries taking part in this project, and then this project is implemented through Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and also National Remote Sensing Center NRSC under the Department of Space. So, this is taken, and you can also see, look at the concept of natural capital accounting. So, it is an umbrella term covering efforts to make use of accounting framework to provide a systematic way to measure and report stocks and flows of natural capital. So, we are also looking at how these natural capitals are, and then how the stock is and how the flow is happening. So, this NCA covers accounting for individual environment assets or resources, both biotic and abiotic, and through this project it is being seen. And then you can see that there has been compilation of national account of country, which is guided by system of national accounts, and then you also see system of environmental economic accounting, which is also taking care of all these ecosystem services. So, this system is a central framework where they give you a method or process which are adopted as an international statistics standards by the UN Statistical Commission. And this accounts system brings into direct focus the relationship between the environment and economy, and which otherwise is not revealed through the other process. So, that is highlighted here. Then we also see NV-Stat India. So, NV-Statistic which provides various aspects of environmental and human interaction. So, that it provides that, and the scope of this statistics is that it provides all dimension of environment, earth, water, air and so on. So, it gives you all the details, and then what kind of changes are happening over time and in different locations, and what are the different factors which are influencing them. So, that kind of information it provides. Then we also see National Mission for Green India. So, here you see that Green India Mission GIM is one of the 8 mission under National Action Plan on Climate Change, which has been adopted, and it was launched in 2014. And then the main idea of this was to safeguard the biological resources of our nation, and like also take care of the livelihoods and protect the livelihood with the negative impact of climate change. So, the idea was also to recognize the vital impact of forestry and ecological sustainability, biodiversity conservation, and food, water and livelihood security. So, one was to protect, safeguard. The second was to acknowledge the importance of it. So, these were the examples from India. We also find some of the international examples of initiatives. So, you can see that UK is one of the first country to carry out national level ecosystem assessment, and then they did it in the line of Millennium Ecosystem Assessment approach, which is a framework which is designed how to assess what kind of ecosystem services are there. And following these assessment, it helped them to recognize what is the value of ecosystem, what kind of resources they have, and what's the value of those resources. So, for example, you can see that they found out that coastal wetland provided flood protection and of the range of 1.5 billion pound annually. So, that was like the cost the environment that kind of services that environment was providing, that kind of protection that environment was providing. So they have been also noticing that there has been decline in ecosystem services. Further, we also see that they have England's biodiversity 2020 strategy, and the idea was to support healthy, well-functioning ecosystem and then to establish the network between the ecological system. So they identified nature improvement areas, which were like main idea was to conserve areas of particular importance for biodiversity and ecosystem services, and this they would conserve through management and by setting up these nature improvement areas. And apart from this, they would also restore the degraded ecosystem as and then contribute towards the climate change mitigation and adaptation. So we further see that EU also published a vision and mission 2020 for biodiversity, and they had certain targets to be met by 2050 to take care of the natural capital and how they can be protected, further how they can stop the loss of biodiversity. Now looking at Vietnam, we see that they have a pilot policy where they have worked out payment for the forest. Environmental services. So you pay for whatever services is provided. So collecting money from entities that benefit from those kind of services so that it could help them to protect the forest as well as take care of the forest. Now looking at US, in US you can see that there is Food Conservation and Energy Act of 2008, which was established to provide technical guidance that would provide measurements of environmental services, what kind of benefits are being derived, and it would also help in conservation and also land management. We also see Oregon Senate Bill 513, and through this they created Ecosystem Service Market Working Group, and this working group would advance policy recommendations for creating framework for integrating ecosystem services market in the state and so that they could have a positive results for ecology. So looking at Brazil, we see another Acre state legislature. So this was established to provide incentives for environmental services and also to set up institution and legal framework for Acre and then to measure and then assign value to all these services. And we also see that they have, which you will also look at the methods part, that they have State of Amazon's drafts where they prepared a policy on paying for ecosystem services PES program in the state. So we'll be looking at it later again. So that was about some of the examples from the international initiative. So now we also see that how international finance institutions also ensure that people undertake in the EIA process, how do they undertake and consider what kind of impact it would have on ecosystem services. So we see these agencies like in particular International Finance Institution, World Bank, through its performance standard 1, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. They all refer to ecosystem services, and in particular the performance standard 6 requires that the client who are looking for the loan for their development project have to show that how the benefits of these ecosystem services, how they are going to maintain it, and then if something is happening, then how they can really mitigate, what kind of measurements they are taking, and it is advised that they maintain the value and functionality of the priority services. So you see that when institutions like this you see that institution like this when they ask, so these all things are streamlined in the EIA process. Now moving on, we all will see what kind of guidance is available about how to go about integrating ecosystem services in EIA. So there are limited guidelines, but you can see the guidelines which are available. You can see the list here. So there are a couple of studies which provide methods and tools and how these have to be incorporated. We are going to see this more when we deal with the EIA method section, where we will learn about how to undertake EIA, what will be the procedure of taking EIA when we deal with the ecosystem services. So some of the references are given here. So that was for this session. So summarizing what we learned in this session, that we looked at the context of ecosystem services. We have seen some of the ecosystem services concepts before, and then we are going to touch upon it later when we do the methods section. Then we also looked at the National Ecosystem Service Policy, what India has and what kind of policies align together to address to the cause. And then we looked at some of the examples at the national level as well as the international level. And then we looked at like what kind of requirements are there by the international finance institutions, and then we looked at some of the guidance which is available about how to integrate ecosystem services into EIA process. So these were the references which we used for today's session, and then there are a lot of examples. We could not cover a lot of them, so there are suggested watch and read which you can see. Look at all the case studies if you wish to, so those are available for you here. And please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinions, experiences and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring EIA. Thank you.